He thought he was just showing up for his son's driving test. But when retired trucker Matthew Stratton stepped onto the lot, what he saw stopped him cold. His son wasn't just driving. He was pulling off a maneuver Matthew himself had invented decades ago, something he'd never written down, something only one man alive should have known. Who taught him, and what else was waiting for Matthew that day? The two-lane highway stretched before Matthew Stratton like an old scar, long, faded, and heavy with memory. He sat hunched in the driver's seat of his faded blue pickup, the hum of the engine carrying him farther south than he'd driven in years. His hands, calloused and scarred from decades behind 18 wheels, gripped the wheel with more tension than the road required. He wasn't hauling freight this time. No logbook, no CB chatter, no deadlines. Just a man chasing the kind of unfinished business that gnawed at him in the quiet hours of the night. For 6 hours, mile after mile, the scenery rolled past. Farm fields, rusted silos, forgotten gas stations. He had seen it all 1,000 times before, yet never like this. With every mile, the asphalt pressed against his chest, as though the road itself was demanding, "What gives you the right to come back now?" Matthew glanced at the passenger seat. A worn leather-bound logbook rested there, edges frayed, pages curled from years of being thumbed through. Inside were sketches of maneuvers he'd drawn during long hauls, diagrams of blind reverses, alley docks, tricks he'd invented to shave minutes off impossible deliveries. Few men could read them, fewer could execute them. He had always meant to pass them on to his son, but life had a way of breaking even the simplest promises. It was about leaving a trace of himself, proof that he hadn't lived all those nights on the road for nothing. Devon. The name came with a stab of guilt that no road was long enough to outrun. Matthew hadn't seen his boy in nearly 5 years. He'd missed birthdays, graduations, the funeral of the only woman who'd ever anchored him. After his wife's passing, Matthew had buried himself in the road until even the company let him go. Retired, they called it, but he knew the truth. He was a relic, a man too stubborn to adapt, too tired to keep pace, too haunted to go home. And yet here he was, driving toward the one thing that might still matter. Devon was taking his CDL test today, the final step before earning the license that could open the same road that had defined Matthew's life. But would his son even want to see him? The dashboard clock ticked past noon. His stomach growled, but he drove on, afraid that if he stopped, he'd never start again. He thought about turning back more than once, rehearsing excuses. "I'll call him later," he muttered. "Send a card. Something." But the thought of Devon's face when he found out his father hadn't shown up again was unbearable. The last time they had spoken, Devon's voice had been flat, brittle. "You were there for everyone else, Dad. Not for us." Words Matthew carried like gravel in his chest. He hadn't argued. How could he? Every mile marker today felt like penance. One more bead on a rosary of regret. As he neared the testing facility, the road narrowed into industrial lots and warehouses. Signs for the Department of Motor Vehicles pointed the way, and Matthew's chest tightened. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel. He had faced icy passes, blind curves, and 30-hour shifts, but nothing felt as terrifying as the thought of stepping out of this truck and seeing his son's eyes. Cold, distant, or worse, indifferent. The facility itself was nothing special. A chain-link fence, rows of orange cones, a battered trailer serving as the office. But to Matthew, it looked like a stage where every mistake of his life might be replayed. He pulled into the gravel lot, the crunch under his tires loud in the silence of his cab. He shut off the engine but didn't move, his hands fixed on the wheel, as if letting go might unravel the courage that had brought him this far. On the far side of the lot, young men and women in safety vests were lined up near a set of training rigs. Their voices carried on the wind, laughter, nerves, the sound of beginnings. Matthew swallowed hard. His son would be among them, older now, a man, not the boy he remembered. His eyes fell again to the logbook on the seat. He opened it, thumbed through sketches made in truck stops and diners, lines and arrows marking angles only another trucker could understand. He had always imagined handing it to Devon on the day he got his license. "These are yours now," he would say. Passing of the torch. But now it felt foolish, like trying to patch years of absence with a notebook full of scribbles. Still, he tucked the logbook under his arm as he stepped out. The gravel shifted beneath his boots, each step heavier than the last. He could smell diesel on the breeze, hear the rumble of engines starting up. Familiar sounds, comforting once. Today they sounded like a trial. For a moment, Matthew considered staying by the fence, watching from the shadows. He could claim later that he was there, even if Devon never knew it. But as he looked at the trainees, one figure caught his eye. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the same determined frown Matthew had worn at that age. His son. The air caught in Matthew's throat. Time hadn't erased the resemblance. Devon had his mother's sharp jawline, Matthew's steady stance. He moved with quiet confidence, checking mirrors, climbing into the cab of a rig like he belonged there. Pride surged through Matthew's chest, but so did fear. This was Devon's moment, not his. Matthew tightened his grip on the logbook. The long road back had brought him here. Whatever happened next, anger, rejection, silence. He knew one thing. He couldn't turn away again. With a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff, he started across the lot toward his son. Matthew stopped short at the edge of the lot, boots planted in gravel as if he'd stepped into another lifetime. He expected to watch his son fumble through a basic test, parallel parks, wide turns, the sort of routine maneuvers that tripped up rookies. Instead, what unfolded in front of him nearly made him drop the logbook from his hands. Devon was behind the wheel of a long-wheelbase Freightliner, the kind of rig even seasoned drivers respected. A line of bright orange cones marked a blindside alley dock, a test tough enough on its own. But Devon wasn't approaching it with stiff caution or the jerky corrections of a rookie. He was moving with precision, angles measured in instinct, not luck. Matthew's pulse quickened. He leaned forward, gripping the chain-link fence. The truck rolled back smoothly, trailer swinging in perfect arc. Devon cut the wheel, held for just the right beat, then straightened. The rear bumper of the trailer slid into the narrow box with no more than 2 inches of grace on either side. Matthew's throat tightened. That wasn't a trick from any handbook. It was the move he'd carved out of sleepless nights and impossible docks. Something that should have died with him and Clint. The same trick he'd drawn in his logbook decades ago. Refined on midnight deliveries when there was no margin for error. A sequence of countersteers and pauses no manual could teach. He'd shared it once, long ago, with one man. His co-driver, Clint Callahan. But Clint was gone. Out of his life. And the maneuver, never written, never taught, should have gone with him. So how in God's name was his son doing it now? The examiner's whistle cut sharp through the lot. His pen scratched fast across the page. His brows lifted in the kind of disbelief only veterans carried. A ripple of approval went through the line of trainees watching. Some even clapped. Devon climbed down from the cab, his expression calm, almost modest, like he hadn't just pulled off something half the veterans in the county couldn't repeat. Matthew's legs moved before his mind caught up. He pushed open the gate and stepped onto the lot, gravel crunching underfoot. A few heads turned. He must have looked out of place. Older, worn, clutching a logbook like it was holy scripture. Devon didn't notice him at first. He was listening to the examiner, nodding once before stepping back to rejoin the group. It wasn't until another man clapped a hand on his shoulder that Matthew's breath caught all over again. Clint. Older, grayer, but unmistakable. Thick-shouldered under a safety vest, still carrying himself with the quiet authority of a man who'd spent half his life in cabs and loading docks. His beard was silver now, his eyes creased deeper. But when he turned, Matthew saw the same steady gaze that had once watched his back on endless runs across state lines. And there was Devon, laughing with him, easy and familiar, calling him Uncle Clint. The laugh landed like a blade, pride warming one side of him, pain carving into the other. Pride that his boy had grown into a driver with skill beyond his years. Pain that someone else had been there to guide him. Clint caught sight of him. The recognition was instant. His face froze, then softened into something unreadable. He gave a small nod, subtle but heavy with meaning. I know. We'll talk. Devon followed his gaze. Their eyes met. Matthew saw his son not as a memory, not as a regret, but as a man standing right in front of him. Devon's jaw tightened, surprise flickering into something guarded. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just gave a stiff nod before turning back to his classmates. Matthew's chest ached. He wanted to call out, to explain, to say everything at once. But the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he stepped back, giving space, clutching the logbook tighter. The rest of the test blurred. He saw Devon climb into another rig, execute a flawless serpentine weave, nail an emergency stop. Every move carried echoes of discipline, of lessons handed down. Not his lessons, Clint's. When the whistle blew to signal the end, the trainees gathered near the trailer office. Devon stood among them, tall, shoulders squared, the easy confidence of a man who belonged. Matthew lingered near the fence, half in shadow, watching. A memory burned in his mind. Years ago, on a loading dock in Laredo, Clint had teased him after a perfect blind reverse. "You ought to patent that trick," Clint had said, grinning. "Pass it on one day." Matthew had laughed then, never imagining the day would come when the move lived on without him. Now it had. And as Devon disappeared inside with the examiner, Matthew finally understood. He hadn't just come to watch a test. He'd walked straight into a reckoning with the choices that had defined his life. At the far end of the lot, Clint started walking toward him. Slow, deliberate. His old co-driver's expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried the weight of years. Matthew braced himself. The road back to his son wasn't just long. It was about to get steep. Clint's boots crunched steadily over the gravel until he stood a few feet from Matthew. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. No greetings, no handshakes, only the weight of miles and years settling between them. Clint was broader now. His once black beard turned silver, but his eyes hadn't changed. They were still steady, practical, and sharp, the eyes of a man who didn't waste words. "You picked a hell of a day to show up," Clint finally said, voice low and gravelly. Matthew shifted his weight, the logbook still tucked tight under his arm. "I didn't know you'd be here." "You didn't know a lot of things," Clint answered, his tone pointed but not cruel. "But here we are." The air buzzed with the sound of idling engines and young voices laughing from the other side of the lot. It might as well have been silence for the way Matthew's chest tightened. He glanced toward the office trailer, where Devon had gone inside with the examiner. He wanted to follow, but he couldn't, not yet. Clint's gaze flicked to the logbook. "You still carry that thing?" Matthew nodded. "Some things don't let go." Clint huffed a laugh. "Tell me about it." He crossed his arms, his vest catching the late afternoon light. "Look, before you get any ideas, Devon didn't need me to replace you, but someone had to be there. He was just a kid, Matt. Angry, lost. I wasn't about to watch him fall apart." The words stung, though Matthew knew they weren't meant to. He swallowed. "I should have been there." "Yeah," Clint said softly. "You should have." Silence stretched, filled with the clatter of gears from another trainee practicing in the distance. Matthew stared at the ground, the gravel blurring as guilt pressed in. All the apologies he had rehearsed on the drive down now felt hollow. "I didn't mean to," Matthew began, but the words died as the trailer door opened. Devon stepped out, papers in hand, a fresh certificate clipped to the top. He was flanked by two younger trainees, both clapping him on the back, congratulating him. He smiled at them. A smile Matthew hadn't seen in years, but when his eyes shifted to the two older men standing apart, his expression hardened. He walked over, each step purposeful. The laughter from his classmates faded behind him. "So this is it?" Devon's voice was steady, but the tightness in it betrayed years of unsaid things. "You just show up out of nowhere, after everything?" Matthew opened his mouth, but nothing came. He tried again. "I wanted to be here. For you." Devon's eyes narrowed. "For me? You don't get to say that. You weren't there when Mom was sick. You weren't there when I needed someone to tell me how to change the oil in my first car. You weren't there at all." His voice rose, sharp enough to turn heads from the group near the trailer. Clint shifted uneasily, But Devon didn't give him a chance to intervene. And then Uncle Clint, he spat the name like a challenge. He stepped in. He taught me how to drive, how to handle a clutch, how to work through things. He told me stories about you, made it sound like you were some kind of hero. But you weren't. You were gone. Every word hit with the weight of freight iron, and the worst part was knowing he'd loaded that burden himself. He forced himself to stand firm, shoulders squared though his throat burned. "You're right," he said quietly. "I wasn't there. I failed you." Devon faltered for a second, surprise flashing in his eyes, but anger quickly took its place. "And now you think you can just walk back in? Hand me that notebook and everything's fine." He gestured at the logbook still clutched to Matthew's chest. "I don't need it. I don't need you." The pause between them roared louder than the engines idling across the lot. Even the hum of engines seemed to dim. Around them, the younger trainees had grown quiet, their eyes darting between the confrontation and each other. A few whispered, not understanding the full weight but sensing its gravity. Matthew took a breath, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I didn't come to erase what I missed. I can't. But when I saw you out there," he paused, his voice breaking, "I was proud, Devon. Proud in a way I didn't think I deserved to be." Devon's jaw locked, his eyes shimmering with the kind of hurt that begged to be hidden. He shook his head, turning as if to walk away. But one of the younger drivers, a girl no older than 19, piped up without realizing how much her words cut through the tension. "Man, if my dad showed up like that, I'd want him to teach me everything he knows." Devon's shoulders stiffened. He hated that a stranger's offhand remark could pierce deeper than any lecture. For a split second, he wasn't the angry son, just a boy who had once waited by the window for a father who never came. The group chuckled nervously, then went silent again. Devon froze mid-step. His shoulders stiffened. The remark wasn't meant for him, but it landed all the same. Clint cleared his throat. "Kid," he said gently, "nobody's asking you to forget, but maybe don't throw away what you might still need." Devon didn't answer. He just stood there, back turned, fists balled at his sides. Then, without looking at either man, he muttered, "Do what you want. I'm done for today," and walked toward the far end of the lot. Matthew watched him go, every step away heavier than the last. He wanted to chase after him, beg for another chance, but his legs wouldn't move. Instead, he stood rooted, the logbook still clutched like a lifeline, his heart hammering with the truth. Reconciliation wasn't going to be won with one appearance. Clint laid a hand on his shoulder, steady, grounding. "Give him time. You're not the only one carrying ghosts here." Matthew nodded faintly, his gaze locked on his son's retreating figure. Around them, the younger drivers had begun to talk again, their laughter tentative but real. They looked at Devon like he was already a leader, a man worth following. Matthew saw not just what he had lost, but what might still be saved, if only he had the courage to try. The sun dipped lower across the training lot, painting the cones and trailers in amber light. Matthew sat on the tailgate of his pickup, the logbook open on his knees. He wasn't reading it anymore, just staring at the faded sketches, the loops of his own handwriting, relics of a man who thought the road would always be enough. Clint stood nearby, watching the younger drivers pack up. A few lingered by the rigs, still buzzing about Devon's flawless performance. Their chatter floated across the lot, snippets about angles, breaking points, the crazy perfect alley dock. To them, Devon was already a kind of legend. But Devon himself wasn't there. He had stormed off after their confrontation, disappearing behind the far line of parked trucks. Matthew's chest tightened each time he glanced that way, half expecting and half dreading his return. Clint walked over, scratching his beard. "He cooled off some," he said. "Went to sit by the fence line. He's not gone. That's something." Matthew closed the logbook. "Doesn't feel like much." "Then make it more," Clint said simply. "Show those kids something only you can show. Let him see you through their eyes." The suggestion hit Matthew like a challenge. He looked toward the cluster of trainees still standing near the rigs. They were laughing, swapping notes, tossing each other half-serious dares. Young, eager, still green enough to believe skill alone could carry them through. He saw himself in them, saw Devon in them too. Matthew rose with effort, the years heavy in his bones, each step over the gravel carrying more resolve than his words ever could. The group quieted, surprised by the older man walking toward them with the leather logbook tucked under his arm. "You kids want to see something?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. They glanced at each other, then nodded. One of them spoke up. "You drove back in the day, right?" Matthew allowed a small smile. "Back in the day and most of the nights too. And I got something that never made it into a handbook." He held up the logbook, flipping it open to a page worn thin from years of revisits. Lines and arrows mapped out a maneuver, tight curves drawn with meticulous detail. "This here's what you saw Devon do earlier. We called it a blind snake dock. It'll save your hide on docks that weren't built for 18-wheelers. But it ain't just about steering, it's about patience, timing, trusting what you know, not just what you see." The trainees leaned in, eyes wide. One boy asked if he could try it. Another asked if Matthew would ride along and talk him through. As he guided one of the trainees into the cab, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision. Devon stood a few yards away, arms folded, face unreadable. He was watching. Matthew didn't call out. He just climbed into the passenger seat beside the young driver and began talking him through the angles. His voice steadied as he gave instructions. "Cut here. Hold. Now straighten. Watch your trailer pivot. Breathe. Don't rush it." The truck jerked, then corrected, easing back into the dock space with a clumsy but successful finish. The trainees erupted into cheers, slapping the rookie on the back. As he climbed down, his pulse thudded in his ears. It was the rush he thought he'd lost forever, the fire of being useful, of passing something on. And then he noticed Devon stepping closer, the hardness in his expression softened by something else. Curiosity, maybe even pride. "You taught him that?" Devon asked quietly. Matthew nodded. "Taught it to Clint years ago. Never thought I'd get to see it again today." He hesitated, then added, "Didn't expect to see it from you." Devon's jaw tightened, but his voice was softer than before. "Clint showed me, said it was yours." The words landed like a gift Matthew didn't deserve. He swallowed, unable to speak. Devon looked at the logbook in his father's hands. "That's what you came to give me, isn't it?" Matthew held it out, but instead of pushing it on him, he left the decision. "It's yours when you want it, not before." For a long moment, Devon didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the book, his fingers brushing Matthew's calloused ones. Something shifted in the air between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the fragile beginning of something better. Clint clapped both men on the shoulders, grinning. "Well, looks like the next generation just found its trainers. You boys ready to pass on a legacy?" Devon glanced at his father. He didn't look away. Instead, he gave a small nod. "Maybe," he said, "if he can still keep up." The trainees laughed, and Matthew surprised himself by laughing too. The knot in his chest didn't vanish, but it eased, leaving just enough space for hope to breathe. As the sun sank behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the lot, father and son stood side by side. Not healed, not whole, but together. And on that gravel ground, surrounded by trucks, cones, and wide-eyed rookies, Matthew realized the truth. Family wasn't about the miles lost. It was about the miles still ahead. The road hadn't ended after all. It had just taken the long way home. This story reminds us that family isn't lost. It can be rebuilt, mile by mile. Matthew came looking for his past, but instead found a future he thought he'd thrown away. What would you have done in his shoes, walk away or try again? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories that stay with you long after the road ends. See you in the next video.